The knock on the door came just as the morning sun spilled softly across the worn wooden floor, the kind of peaceful moment that usually meant nothing bad could happen. But something about that knock felt different, sharp, deliberate, almost heavy with intention. It echoed through the small house like a warning. Rafik froze mid-step, a cup of tea trembling slightly in his hand. His 6-year-old daughter, Meher, sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, humming quietly as she colored a picture of a bright yellow house with a crooked chimney. For a brief second, he considered ignoring the knock, pretending no one was home, hoping whoever stood outside would simply leave. But life had taught him long ago that some knocks weren't meant to be ignored. He set the cup down slowly and walked toward the door, his heartbeat growing louder with every step. When he opened it, he found himself staring at a man who didn't belong in a place like this. The stranger was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, his posture commanding without saying a word. His eyes, however, were what unsettled Rafik the most, calm, calculating, and carrying a weight of history. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the man's lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile. "It's time to repay what you owe me." Those words hit like a sudden storm, pulling something buried deep within Rafik to the surface. Memories he had tried so hard to forget came rushing back, blurring the present with the past. Before we go further into this story, take a moment to support the channel. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unseen sacrifices, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Rafik stood there, gripping the edge of the door as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He studied the man's face more carefully now, searching for recognition, and slowly, painfully, it came to him. Years ago, in a completely different life, when everything had fallen apart, when he had been drowning in debt and desperation, there had been someone who helped him, a stranger who offered a loan when no one else would. It had been a lifeline, one he had clung to without fully understanding its cost. That stranger now stood in front of him. Back then, Rafik had been a different man. His wife had still been alive, laughter still filled the house, and hope had not yet been replaced by survival. But everything changed the day she passed away unexpectedly, leaving him alone with a newborn child and a mountain of responsibilities he wasn't prepared for. Grief had consumed him, and in his desperation to keep life together, he had made decisions he barely understood. The loan had helped him survive those early days. It paid for hospital bills, food, rent, and the fragile stability he needed to raise his daughter. But time passed, and life remained unforgiving. Jobs were lost, opportunities slipped away, and slowly, the debt became something he could no longer manage. Eventually, the man who had lent him the money disappeared. No calls, no letters, no reminders. It was as if the debt itself had dissolved into the past. Until now. The CEO stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his presence filling the modest living room with an uncomfortable contrast. He looked around briefly, taking in the simple furniture, the faded curtains, the drawings taped to the walls, tiny glimpses of a life built with effort and love rather than wealth. Rafik closed the door behind him, his mind racing with questions he was almost too afraid to ask. He didn't know what repayment meant anymore. He didn't have money. He barely had enough to get through each month. The fear settled in his chest like a stone. Meher looked up from her drawing, her innocent eyes observing the stranger with quiet curiosity. She smiled softly, unaware of the tension in the room, and that simple gesture seemed to pause something inside the CEO. For a fleeting moment, the hardness in his expression softened. Rafik noticed it. And that was when confusion began to mix with fear. The man walked slowly toward the window, sunlight catching the edges of his sharp features. He seemed less like a collector of debts and more like someone searching for something lost. His voice, when he spoke again, was calmer now, but still carried authority. He said that not all debts were measured in money. Rafik didn't understand. The past began unfolding in fragments, memories Rafiq had buried under years of struggle. He remembered that night clearly now, the night everything had changed. It had been raining heavily, streets flooded, visibility almost gone. He had been driving back from the hospital, exhausted, emotionally shattered, when he saw a car stranded by the roadside. Inside was a man, unconscious, bleeding, barely alive. Without thinking, Rafiq had pulled over. He didn't know who the man was. He didn't ask questions. He simply acted. He broke the window, pulled him out, and rushed him to the hospital, staying until doctors took over. In that moment, nothing else mattered. That man was the one now standing in his living room. The realization hit Rafiq like a wave. Back then, the CEO had been on the brink of death. The accident could have taken everything from him, his life, his company, his future. But Rafiq, a stranger with nothing to gain, had saved him. The loan had never been a business transaction. It had been gratitude. But gratitude, it seemed, had not been fully repaid. The CEO turned to face Rafiq, his expression now layered with something deeper, respect, perhaps even admiration. He spoke about how he had searched for Rafiq after recovering, wanting to thank him properly, but circumstances had delayed him. By the time he returned, Rafiq's life had already begun to unravel. Instead of offering charity, he had chosen to give him something that preserved dignity, a loan, something Rafiq could accept without feeling indebted in a humiliating way. But over time, he realized something. Rafiq never asked for more. Never reached out. Never used the connection to gain advantage. He simply survived. And that, to the CEO, meant more than any repayment. The room grew quiet, filled with unspoken understanding. Rafiq felt something shift inside him, a release of guilt he had carried silently for years. The CEO stepped closer, his tone now completely different. He explained that the debt he spoke of was not financial. It was something far greater. He owed Rafiq a life. And now, it was time to repay it properly. What followed was something Rafiq could never have imagined. The CEO offered him an opportunity, not as charity, but as recognition. A stable job within his company, one that matched his resilience rather than his past failures. A chance for Meher to have a better future, better education, a life that didn't revolve around constant struggle. At first, Rafiq hesitated. Pride, fear, disbelief, they all held him back. But then he looked at his daughter, still sitting on the floor, now drawing the same house but adding a bigger sun above it. Something in that simple drawing broke through his hesitation. He realized this wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. Life had given him a second chance, disguised as a debt. And this time, he couldn't turn away. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, everything began to change. The small house no longer felt like a place of survival, but a place of growth. Rafiq worked tirelessly, proving not just his worth to the company, but to himself. He carried the same determination he had shown the night of the accident, the same instinct to act, to care, to push forward no matter what. And the CEO, despite his power and status, remained quietly present, not as a superior, but as someone who understood the value of what had been given and received. Their lives, once connected by a moment of crisis, were now bound by something far stronger, mutual respect. As the story nears its end, take a moment to reflect. If this story touched your heart even a little, don't scroll away without showing your support. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this today, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House for more powerful stories like this. And before we close, here's a special request for you. Comment the word kindness if you believe that even the smallest act of goodness can change someone's entire life. Because sometimes, the debts we fear the most are actually blessings waiting to return. Rafiq stood once again by his door one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and orange. Meher ran around the yard, her laughter filling the air in a way it hadn't in years. For the first time in a long time, peace didn't feel temporary. It felt earned. And somewhere in the distance, a man who once knocked on his door not as a collector, but as a reminder, had fulfilled a promise that went beyond money, beyond status, beyond expectation. A promise that kindness, no matter how small, always finds its way back. And when it does, it changes everything.